No one could tame the frozen heart of the Mafia boss until two 5-year-old boys, the sons of the servant he had turned into a slave, did the unthinkable. Dominic Castellano wasn't merely dangerous. He was darkness incarnate, wrapped in a black 3-piece suit with a scar running from his temple down to his left cheekbone. At 36, his steel-gray eyes could make the hardest men in Chicago's underworld bow their heads. They called him Il Fantasma, the ghost. Not because he killed, but because no one ever saw him kill. People simply disappeared. But there was a secret Dominic hid from the entire world. He was dying slowly, day by day. A tumor in his brain grew like a ticking time bomb, and no doctor dared stay long enough to save him. And the two boys whose father he had murdered, the two children whose mother he had forced to kneel and wipe her husband's blood off the floor right in front of him, they were the only ones who could save his life. And when the miracle happened, it was Dominic Castellano himself who would be changed forever. The Castellano mansion sat on the highest hill in Chicago's North Shore, a fortress of gray stone and iron gates that seemed to swallow the light around it. 52 rooms, walls half a meter thick, and a surveillance system that never slept. They said even a fly couldn't enter without being spotted within 10 seconds. But what made this place truly terrifying wasn't the walls or the armed guards patrolling day and night. It was the man seated behind the massive oak desk on the 3rd floor, staring down at the doctor before him with eyes colder than a winter grave. Dr. Nathan Cross had treated mob bosses, cartel leaders, and men whose names made federal agents lose sleep. But standing in Dominic Castellano's study, he felt like a mouse trembling before a snake. "Mr. Castellano, please understand," the doctor tried again, his voice wavering despite his best efforts. "The tumor has grown significantly in the past month. Without immediate surgery, the pressure on your brain will what?" Dominic's voice cut through the air like a blade carving into bone. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. The quieter he spoke, the more dangerous he became. Dr. Cross swallowed hard. "You could suffer a massive hemorrhage at any moment. You could die within minutes, and there would be nothing anyone could do." Dominic leaned back in his leather chair, his scarred face revealing nothing. The scar that ran from his temple to his cheekbone seemed to pulse in the dim light, a permanent reminder of a past he never discussed. "You're the 5th doctor in 3 months, Dominic said slowly, each word measured and deliberate. "The first 4 gave me the same speech. Do you know where they are now?" The doctor's face went pale. I don't. They're alive," Dominic continued, a ghost of a smile crossing his lips. "Because I allowed them to be. But my patience has limits, Dr. Cross. Very narrow limits." He stood up slowly, and even though the doctor was taller, he somehow seemed to shrink in Dominic's presence. "I don't pay $2,000 an hour to hear you tell me to lie down and wait for death." Dominic's steel-gray eyes locked onto the doctor's, unblinking, merciless. "Get out. Before I change my mind about letting you leave in one piece." Dr. Cross didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his medical bag and moved toward the door with quick, controlled steps. Not running in front of Dominic Castellano was a sign of fear, and fear was the very thing that amused a predator. Tony Marchetti, Dominic's right hand for 15 years, stood like a stone statue by the door. His face betrayed nothing as the doctor passed, but his hand rested casually near the gun holstered at his hip. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and the moment it did, Dominic's mask cracked. His hand shot out, gripping the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles turned white. Pain detonated behind his eyes like someone had driven a railroad spike through his skull. The room tilted. The edges of his vision darkened, bleeding into gray. He couldn't breathe. His knees buckled, and for one terrifying moment, the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago nearly collapsed onto his own floor. But Dominic Castellano did not fall. He refused to fall. He clenched his teeth until his jaw ached, forcing himself to stay upright through sheer will. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His heart hammered against his ribs like a caged animal trying to escape. The pain was getting worse. Every week, every day, it grew stronger. The tumor was eating him alive from the inside, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He thought about his enemies, Viktor Volkov, circling like a vulture, waiting for any sign of weakness. He thought about his men, loyal only as long as he remained strong. He thought about the empire he had built over 2 decades, brick by bloody brick. If they knew he was dying, everything would collapse. His allies would become enemies overnight. His enemies would tear him apart before the tumor could finish the job. No one could know, not Tony, not his father, not anyone. Dominic forced himself upright, straightened his suit jacket, and walked to the window overlooking the grounds below. In the distance, He could see the servants' quarters near the basement entrance, the place where Elena Vasquez and her 2 sons existed like ghosts, invisible and forgotten. He didn't think about them. He never thought about the people he destroyed, or so he told himself. Terror squeezed his chest. But Dominic Castellano's pride was a fortress built over 23 years. He would never admit weakness, never admit fear, never admit that he was slowly dying. Meanwhile, 3 floors below where Dominic stood at his window, another world existed, one that never saw sunlight. The basement storage room measured barely 8 square meters. No windows, no ventilation. Just cold, concrete walls stained with mold and dampness that seeped into everything. The thin mattress on the floor, the threadbare blankets, the very bones of the people who lived there. Elena Vasquez sat on the edge of that mattress, her body aching from 20 hours of labor. At 27, she looked 40. Her black hair, once thick and lustrous, hung limp around a face hollowed by exhaustion. Her brown eyes, once warm with life, now held only the dull emptiness of someone who had stopped hoping long ago. Her hands were cracked and bleeding from scrubbing floors. Her knees were swollen and raw from kneeling on stone. Her back screamed with pain every time she moved, but she didn't complain. Complaining changed nothing in this house. In the corner of the room, 2 small boys sat cross-legged on the cold floor, carefully folding white towels into perfect rectangles. This was the only task they were allowed to do, the only way they could contribute without being seen by anyone upstairs. Marco and Lucas Vasquez were 5 years old, identical twins with curly black hair and striking green eyes they had inherited from their father. Eyes that would never see their father again. "Fold the corners tighter," Marco whispered to his brother, demonstrating with small, precise movements. "Like Mama showed us." Lucas nodded, his little fingers working carefully, but his attention kept drifting upward, toward the ceiling, toward the floors above where footsteps occasionally echoed like distant thunder. "Marco," Lucas whispered, so quietly that even their mother could barely hear. "The big master is sick." Marco's hands paused on the towel. "I know, really sick." Lucas's green eyes were unfocused, as if he were looking at something invisible. "I can feel it. There's something dark inside his head. Something bad." Marco closed his eyes for a moment, concentrating. When he opened them again, his face was troubled. "I see it too. It's black, like ink, big as an orange, and it's growing, eating him from the inside." Elena's head snapped toward her sons, her heart lurching with fear. She crossed the tiny room in 2 steps and knelt before them, gripping their small shoulders. "Stop," she hissed, her voice barely audible but sharp with panic. "Both of you, stop talking about this right now." But Mama, Lucas began. "No." Elena's eyes darted toward the door, terrified that someone might be listening. "What did I tell you? What did I make you promise?" Marco lowered his head. "Never let anyone know what we can do. Never tell anyone what we see," Lucas added quietly. "That's right." Elena pulled them both close, hugging them fiercely despite the rule that forbade her from touching them during daylight hours. If anyone saw, she would be punished, but in this moment, she didn't care. "If people find out about your gift, they won't think you're special," she whispered into their hair. "They'll think you're monsters. They'll take you away from me. They'll lock you up and do terrible things to you. Do you understand?" Both boys nodded against her chest. "The man upstairs. Whatever is wrong with him, it's not our business." Elena's voice trembled. "He killed your father. He turned us into slaves. Whatever happens to him, we don't get involved. Promise me." "We promise, Mama," they said in unison. But even as the words left their lips, Marco and Lucas exchanged a glance that only twins could share. A silent conversation passed between them in the span of a heartbeat. They had promised not to tell anyone. They hadn't promised not to care. Elena held her sons for another precious moment before forcing herself to let go. She had to get back to work, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. That was the price of their survival. As she stood to leave, Lucas tugged at her worn dress. "Mama," he whispered, the darkness in his head. "It's getting bigger every day. He doesn't have much time left." Elena froze, her hand on the door. She didn't turn around. She couldn't afford to feel anything for the monster who had destroyed their lives. "Good," she said quietly, and she meant it. But as she climbed the stairs back to her endless labor, she couldn't shake the chill that ran down her spine. The 2 children didn't understand why, but they had always been able to sense illness in other people. And this time, what they sensed was more frightening than anything they had ever felt before. Elena Vasquez had known suffering long before she ever set foot in the Castellano mansion. Pain was the only constant in her life, the thread that wove through every chapter of her existence like a curse she could never escape. She was 7 years old when the fire took everything. She still remembered the smell of smoke filling her lungs, the heat pressing against her bedroom door, the screams of her parents that stopped too suddenly. A neighbor had pulled her through the window seconds before the roof collapsed. She survived with burns on her arms and a hole in her heart that would never heal. The Street Agnes orphanage in Detroit became her new home. For 11 years, those gray walls were her entire world, and it was a world designed to break children rather than save them. The older kids beat her for being small. The caretakers beat her for crying about it. She learned to hide food under her mattress because meals were never guaranteed. She learned to sleep with one eye open because darkness brought predators. She learned that love was a fairy tale told to children who had parents, and she would never be one of those children again. By the time Elena turned 18, she had endured more abuse than most people experience in a lifetime. The orphanage released her onto the streets of Detroit with nothing but the clothes on her back and $50 that wouldn't last a week. She worked 3 jobs just to afford a room in a building where rats outnumbered tenants. She cleaned offices at night, washed dishes in the morning, and worked retail in between. Sleep became a luxury. Food became optional. But she was free. For the first time in her life, no one was hurting her. Then she met Miguel Vasquez. He was handsome, charming, and he looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. For a girl who had never known tenderness, his attention felt like sunlight after years of darkness. He promised her safety. He promised her love. He promised her a future. They married 6 months later. Elena thought her nightmare was finally over. She was wrong. The gambling started small, a few dollars here and there, weekend trips to the casino that he swore were just for fun. But addiction doesn't stay small. Within 2 years, Miguel owed money to people whose names he wouldn't speak aloud. And when the debts piled up, his charm turned to rage. The first time he hit her, he cried afterward and swore it would never happen again. Elena believed him because she needed to believe. The second time, he didn't apologize. By the 10th time, she had stopped counting. When Elena discovered she was pregnant, she thought the baby might change him. Instead, it made things worse. Miguel resented the money spent on prenatal care. He resented her growing belly. He resented everything she represented, a responsibility he had never wanted. She nearly lost the twins twice. The first time, Miguel shoved her down the stairs during an argument about money. The second time, he kicked her in the stomach when she begged him to stop gambling. Both times, she dragged herself to the hospital alone, made up stories about falling, and prayed her babies would survive. Marco and Lucas were born 8 weeks early, so small they could fit in the palm of her hand. They spent 6 weeks in incubators, fighting for every breath, while Elena sat beside them and wept. The hospital bills were astronomical. Insurance covered almost nothing. Elena took on 3 jobs again, this time while recovering from childbirth and caring for premature infants. She worked until her body broke, then worked some more. She did everything to keep her sons alive, to give them a chance at the life she never had. And Miguel? Miguel gambled away every dollar she earned. He borrowed from loan sharks, from bookies, from anyone who would give him cash. The debts grew from hundreds to thousands to hundreds of thousands. Elena didn't know the full amount until it was far too late. $3 million. That was the number Miguel owed to Dominic Castellano. $3 million borrowed over 5 years of desperate gambling, with interest that compounded like a cancer. Elena had survived hell after hell. She thought nothing could be worse, until the night Dominic Castellano walked into her living room. 10 months ago, the nightmare reached its crescendo. It was 11 o'clock at night. Marco and Lucas were asleep in their small bedroom, clutching each other the way they always did, 2 halves of the same soul, seeking comfort in the darkness. Elena was washing dishes in the kitchen, her hands raw from cheap soap, her mind numb from exhaustion. Then the front door exploded inward. 4 men in black suits stormed into the apartment like demons unleashed from hell. Before Elena could scream, before she could run to her children, 2 of them had already dragged Miguel from the bedroom and thrown him onto the living room floor. "No, please!" Miguel scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his face twisted with terror. "I'll get the money. I swear I'll get it." One of the men grabbed Elena by the arm and forced her onto the couch. Another brought Marco and Lucas from the bedroom, the boys crying and reaching for their mother. They were pushed into her arms with a rough command to stay silent, and then he walked in. Dominic Castellano moved through the shattered doorway like a shadow given form. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply walked, calm and unhurried, as if he were strolling through a park on a Sunday afternoon. His steel-gray eyes swept across the room, the cheap furniture, the peeling wallpaper, the trembling family huddled together. His expression revealed nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just the cold, flat emptiness of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. "Miguel Vasquez," Dominic said, his voice soft and terrifyingly polite. $3 million. 18 months. Not a single payment. Miguel crawled toward him, tears streaming down his face. Please, Mr. Castellano. Please. I'll pay everything. I just need more time. I swear on my children's lives, don't. Dominic's voice hardened to ice. Don't insult me by swearing on lives you've already gambled away. He pulled a gun from inside his jacket, slowly, deliberately, giving Miguel time to understand what was about to happen. You had 10 months, Dominic continued. 10 months to make even a single payment. Instead, you used that time to keep gambling, to dig yourself deeper into a hole you could never escape. He tilted his head slightly, studying Miguel like a scientist examining a failed experiment. I don't do business with men who can't keep their word. No, please. My children, my wife. The gunshot cracked through the room like thunder. Miguel's body jerked once, then crumpled to the floor. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the worn carpet in a dark, terrible stain. Some of it splattered onto Elena's face, warm and wet against her skin. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. She could only stare at her husband's lifeless eyes while her son sobbed against her chest. Dominic holstered his weapon and looked at Elena for the first time. His gaze was utterly devoid of remorse. The debt now belongs to you, he said simply. $3 million. You have two choices. He gestured toward Marco and Lucas, who were trembling in their mother's arms. 1. You work for me until the debt is repaid. Years, decades, however long it takes. 2. I take the children. Healthy twins fetch an excellent price on the black market. Elena's arms tightened around her son's. The words tore from her throat before she could think. I'll work. I'll do anything. Just don't touch my children. Dominic nodded, as if concluding a routine business transaction. Then he pointed to the blood spreading across the floor. Clean it up, he ordered. Yourself. With your own hands. Consider it your first lesson about consequences. Elena spent the next 3 hours on her knees, scrubbing her husband's blood from the floor, while her sons watched in silent horror. By the time she finished, the men had taken Miguel's body away. By morning, a car arrived to transport them to the Castellano mansion. That night, Elena's soul died alongside her husband. Only her body kept moving for Marco and Lucas. They were the only reason she still breathed. 10 months in the Castellano mansion taught Elena the true meaning of survival. Every day began at 4:30 in the morning, when the darkness outside was still absolute, and the cold seeped through the basement walls like poison. Elena would untangle herself from her sleeping sons, press silent kisses to their foreheads, and climb the stairs to begin another 20-hour shift of endless labor, scrubbing floors on her hands and knees until the marble gleamed, washing mountains of laundry until her fingers bled, polishing windows until her arms shook with exhaustion, cleaning dishes from meals she was never allowed to eat, making beds she would never sleep in, dusting rooms she was forbidden to rest in. The mansion had over 50 rooms, and Elena was responsible for most of them. She worked alongside other servants, but she was different. She was not an employee. She was property, a debt to be collected through labor, one agonizing day at a time. She was not permitted to eat with the other staff. Instead, she waited until everyone had finished, then scraped whatever remained into a small bowl and ate alone in the corner of the kitchen. Cold rice, stale bread, vegetables that had gone soft. She consumed every bite without complaint because she needed the strength to keep going. Her body deteriorated week by week. Her knees swelled red and angry from kneeling on stone floors. Her hands cracked and bled, the skin splitting along her knuckles no matter how carefully she tried to protect them. Her back twisted with constant pain, making it impossible to stand straight by the end of each day. But her own suffering was nothing compared to watching her children waste away. Marco and Lucas lived in that windowless storage room like prisoners. No sunlight ever touched their skin. No fresh air filled their lungs. They breathed mold and dampness, slept on a thin mattress that was never quite dry, and saw their mother for only 5 precious hours each night. The rule was absolute and cruel. Elena could only be with her sons between 11 at night and 4 in the morning. During daylight hours, she was forbidden to touch them, hold them, or even speak to them. They were to remain invisible, ghosts haunting the basement, never seen by anyone who mattered. Twice, Marco fell severely ill from the cold and damp. His small body burned with fever, his coughs echoing off the concrete walls like accusations. Elena begged the house manager for medicine, literally dropped to her knees, and pleaded with tears streaming down her face. The first time, the manager made her scrub the entire 3rd floor before granting permission to buy basic antibiotics. The second time, he slapped her across the face for asking, and made her wait 2 more days while Marco shivered and cried. When Elena worked too slowly, when exhaustion made her hands clumsy or her pace falter, the punishment came swiftly. The house manager, a thick-necked man named Bruno who answered only to Dominic, had no patience for weakness. His open palm left bruises on her arms and face. His boots left worse marks when he was particularly displeased. Elena never cried during the day. Tears were a luxury she could not afford. They would only invite more punishment, more cruelty, more proof that she was breaking. But at night, in the darkness of that tiny room, with Marco and Lucas pressed against her chest, the tears came freely. She wept into their hair while they slept, her body shaking with silent sobs that no one would ever hear. She wept for Miguel, despite everything he had done to her. She wept for her sons, trapped in this prison because of their father's sins. And she wept for herself, for the girl who had survived the orphanage, survived the abuse, survived everything life had thrown at her, only to end up here. But she never complained. Not once, not to anyone. Elena didn't complain because she knew it wouldn't change anything. In the Castellano mansion, words had no value. Only power and money had a voice, and she had neither. The gift or the curse, depending on how one looked at it, had revealed itself 2 years before the Castellano nightmare began. Marco and Lucas were 3 years old, toddling along the sidewalk beside their mother on a rare afternoon when Elena had no work and Miguel was out gambling. It was one of those perfect autumn days when the air smelled like fallen leaves and the sun painted everything gold. Then they heard the screech of tires, followed by a small, pitiful cry. A stray cat, orange and white, barely more than a kitten, had been clipped by a passing car. It lay at the edge of the road, its back leg twisted at an impossible angle, blood matting its fur. The driver didn't stop. No one stopped. People walked past as if the dying animal were invisible. But Marco and Lucas broke free from Elena's hands and ran toward it. "Boys, no! Don't touch it!" Elena rushed after them, terrified of disease, of bites, of the trauma of watching something die. She was too late. Marco had already knelt beside the cat's head, placing his tiny palm gently on its skull. Lucas crouched at its hindquarters, his small fingers hovering over the shattered leg. "It hurts so much," Lucas whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I can feel how much it hurts." "We can help," Marco said with a certainty no 3-year-old should possess. "We can make it stop hurting." Before Elena could pull them away, both boys closed their eyes. And then the light came. A soft, pale golden glow emanated from their hands, not blinding, not harsh, just warm and gentle, like the first rays of dawn breaking through darkness. It surrounded the cat, sinking into its fur, its flesh, its broken bones. Elena stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. She watched as the twisted leg straightened itself. She watched as the blood stopped flowing, as the torn skin knitted together like a wound healing and fast forward. She watched as the cat's labored breathing eased, its pained cries fading into silence. 30 seconds. That was all it took. The cat opened its eyes, blinked twice, then stood on all 4 legs, perfectly whole, perfectly healthy, and darted away into the bushes. Marco and Lucas looked up at their mother with exhausted smiles. "We fixed it, Mama," Lucas said. "We made the hurt go away." Elena collapsed to her knees and gathered both boys into her arms, shaking so violently she could barely hold them. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry or scream. What she had witnessed was impossible. It defied everything she knew about the world. In the months that followed, Elena learned more about her son's abilities. Marco was the healer. His hands could mend wounds, cure sickness, restore what was broken. Lucas was the sensor. He could feel illness in others, see it like colors or shadows lurking inside their bodies. They completed each other, 2 halves of the same miraculous whole. But miracles, Elena knew, were dangerous things. People feared what they couldn't understand, and fear made people cruel. She sat her sons down and made them swear the most important promise of their young lives. "Listen to me carefully," she said, gripping their hands. "What you can do this gift, you have no one can ever know about it. Ever. Do you understand?" "But Mama," Marco protested, "we can help people. We can make them better." "No," Elena's voice was fierce. "If people find out, they won't think you're angels. They'll think you're monsters. They'll take you away from me. They'll lock you up in laboratories and do terrible experiments on you. They'll turn you into tools, into weapons, into things instead of children." The boy's eyes widened with fear. "Promise me," Elena begged. "Promise you'll never tell anyone. Promise you'll never show anyone. No matter what." "We promise, Mama," they whispered together. For 2 years, they kept that promise. Through their father's abuse, through the poverty. Through the night Dominic Castellano destroyed their world, they never revealed their secret. But now, in the cold darkness of the basement storage room, the secret was becoming harder to keep. Every night, Lucas would whisper to his brother about the growing darkness in the master's head, the black mass that pulsed and expanded like a living thing. And every night, Marco would wonder if they should do something, if they could do something, if maybe helping the monster upstairs might somehow help them escape. But their mother's warning echoed louder than their instincts. Never. Never let anyone know. The second-floor hallway stretched endlessly before Elena, a river of polished marble that needed to be scrubbed spotless before the afternoon guests arrived. Her knees screamed with every movement. Her back had locked into a permanent curve of pain that made standing straight impossible. But she kept working, kept pushing the worn cloth across the floor, because stopping meant punishment. She didn't hear him approach. "You're Miguel Vasquez's wife." The voice cut through the silence like a blade, and Elena's hands froze mid-motion. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. That voice had haunted her nightmares for 10 months, calm, cold, utterly devoid of humanity. Slowly, she lifted her head. Dominic Castellano stood 5 feet away, dressed in his signature black 3-piece suit, the scar on his face catching the light from the tall windows. His steel-gray eyes studied her with an expression she couldn't read. Not cruelty, not contempt, something else. Something almost like curiosity. "Yes," Elena answered. Her voice came out flat, empty of emotion. She had learned to feel nothing in his presence. Dominic tilted his head slightly. "How long have you been here?" 10 months. "And how much longer until the debt is paid?" Elena almost laughed. Almost. Instead, a bitter smile twisted her cracked lips, the first expression she had allowed herself in weeks. "At the wage you pay?" She met his gaze directly, something no other servant dared to do. "About 50 more years, give or take a decade." Silence hung between them. Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly, but not with anger. He seemed almost intrigued. In a house full of people who trembled at his shadow, who stammered apologies before he even spoke, this broken woman on her knees looked at him without flinching. "You don't cower," he observed. "You don't beg. You don't even look away." "Should I? Everyone else does," Elena resumed, scrubbing the floor, her movements slow and deliberate. "Everyone else still has something to lose." Dominic took a step closer. "And you don't?" "I have my sons." Elena's voice hardened to iron. "That's all. And if you were going to take them, you would have done it already. So no, I have nothing left to fear from you. You have the eyes of someone who isn't afraid to die," Dominic said quietly. Elena stopped scrubbing. She looked up at him again, and this time, something flickered in her brown eyes. Not fear, not submission, something far more dangerous. "I already died," she said, each word precise and cold. "The night you shot my husband in front of me. The night you made me wipe his blood off the floor with my own hands while my children watched. Whatever is standing here now, it's not alive. It's just a body that keeps moving because my sons need someone to protect them." She held his gaze without blinking. "So tell me, Mr. Castellano, what else is there to fear?" For a long moment, Dominic said nothing. His face betrayed no reaction, but something shifted behind those gray eyes. Something human, perhaps. Or maybe just the ghost of something that used to be human, long ago. Then he turned away without another word. He made it 3 steps before his body betrayed him. Elena saw it happen, the slight stumble, the way his hand shot out to brace against the wall, the almost imperceptible tremor that ran through his shoulders. His breathing changed, became labored, controlled. He stood there for several seconds, fighting against something invisible, before forcing himself upright and continuing down the hallway. His steps were heavy, his shoulders hunched slightly forward, and for just a moment, the most powerful man in Chicago looked like exactly what he was. A man dying by inches, fighting a battle he could never win. Elena watched him disappear around the corner, Lucas's words echoing in her mind. There's something dark inside his head. Something bad. It's eating him from the inside. For one fleeting instant, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man broken, suffering, desperately alone. But then she remembered the gunshot, the blood spreading across her living room floor, the weight of Miguel's body as they dragged it away, the screams of her children that haunted her every night, and the hatred returned, burning away any trace of sympathy. Elena watched him walk away, his steps heavy, his shoulders slightly hunched. For a moment, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man fighting against something invisible, but then she remembered Miguel's blood on the floor, and the hatred returned. That evening, Elena found herself alone in the kitchen with Gloria Santini, The elderly housekeeper was 60 years old, with silver hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck and kind brown eyes that seemed out of place in this house of shadows. In the 10 months Elena had worked here, Gloria was the only person who treated her like a human being rather than property. "Sit," Gloria said, placing a plate of warm food in front of Elena. Real food, chicken, vegetables, fresh bread, not scraps. "Eat. You need your strength." Elena hesitated, glancing toward the door. "If someone sees, no one will see. The master is in his study, and the others know better than to question me." Gloria sat down across from her, her own hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "I've been in this house for 35 years. I know how to do things without anyone noticing." Elena ate, each bite feeling like a gift she didn't deserve. When was the last time she had tasted warm bread? She couldn't remember. "You spoke to him today," Gloria said quietly. It wasn't a question. Elena's hand stilled. "How did you know?" "I know everything that happens in this house." Gloria's eyes were distant, focused on something far beyond the kitchen walls. "And I know the way he looked when he came down from the second floor. Confused. Almost. Troubled. That doesn't happen often." "I didn't say anything special. I just told him the truth. The truth is the most dangerous thing you can give Dominic Castellano." Gloria paused, her weathered fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "But perhaps it's also what he needs to hear." Elena set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "Why are you telling me this?" Gloria was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of secrets kept and sorrows witnessed. "Because I want you to understand something. Not to forgive him, I would never ask that. But to understand." She took a deep breath. "Dominic wasn't always the man you see today. He wasn't born a monster." Elena's jaw tightened. "Could have fooled me. When I first came to this house, Dominic was just a boy, 13 years old." A sad smile crossed Gloria's face. "He was so different then. Always laughing, always running through the halls, always getting into mischief. He loved his mother more than anything in the world." "His mother?" "Isabella." Gloria's voice softened with reverence. "The most beautiful, gentle woman I have ever known. She was like sunlight in this dark place. She would sing while she worked in the garden. She would bake cookies for the staff and sneak them to us when Salvatore wasn't looking. And she adored her children." "Children?" Elena asked despite herself. "There were others?" "A daughter. Sophia." Gloria's eyes glistened. 8 years old. A tiny thing with curly black hair and a laugh that could fill an entire room. Dominic worshipped her. He called her his little shadow because she followed him everywhere. He protected her like she was the most precious treasure in the world. Elena felt something shift in her chest, not sympathy, not forgiveness, but something uncomfortable. Something that complicated the simple hatred she had cultivated for 10 months. What happened to them? Gloria's hands began to tremble. She set down her teacup to steady herself. There was another family, the O'Briens, Irish Mafia. They had been fighting with the Castellanos for territory for years. One night, they decided to end the war permanently. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. They took Isabella and Sophia, kidnapped them in the middle of the night while Dominic and his father were at a meeting across town. Elena stopped breathing. They demanded a ransom, money and territory, everything the Castellanos had built. Gloria shook her head slowly. But Salvatore was a proud man, a stubborn man. He refused to negotiate. He said it would make him look weak. He said he would rescue them himself, that he would make the O'Briens pay. And 5 days. Tears began to roll down Gloria's weathered cheeks. For 5 days, Isabella and Sophia were held captive. For 5 days, Dominic begged his father to pay the ransom, to do anything to bring them home. And for 5 days, Salvatore refused. Gloria's voice broke. On the 6th morning, 2 wooden crates arrived at the front gate. Dominic was the one who opened them. He was 13 years old, and he saw. She couldn't finish. She pressed a hand to her mouth, struggling to compose herself. What they did to his mother and sister. No child should ever see such things. No human being should ever have to witness what that boy witnessed. The kitchen fell silent except for Gloria's quiet weeping. After that day, Dominic never cried again, never smiled, never laughed. He built walls around his heart so high and so thick that nothing could ever get through. Gloria wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. He became the monster you see today because being a monster was the only way to survive the pain, the only way to make sure no one could ever hurt him again. Elena sat motionless, her mind reeling. She thought of Marco and Lucas, huddled together in the basement. She thought of what it would do to them to see her killed, to be powerless to stop it. She thought of a 13-year-old boy opening a wooden crate. "I'm not telling you this to excuse what he's done," Gloria said firmly. "What he did to your husband, to you, to your children, it's unforgivable. I know that. He knows that. Then why tell me at all?" Gloria's eyes filled with tears. "He wasn't born a monster. He was made into one. And sometimes, when he looks at your two boys, I still see that 13-year-old child, the one who lost everything and never learned how to grieve." 2 weeks after Gloria's revelation, the Castellano mansion transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Crystal chandeliers blazed with light. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. The finest wines and champagnes lined the bars. And the grand ballroom, a space Elena had scrubbed on her hands and knees countless times, glittered like a palace from another century. It was the annual Castellano gathering, the night when the most powerful figures in the American underworld descended upon Chicago to pay tribute to their king. 60 crime bosses from across the nation, each commanding their own empire of violence and money, all gathered under one roof to drink expensive liquor, exchange polished pleasantries, and quietly measure each other's weaknesses. Elena had not been meant to attend. Servants like her debt slaves, invisible ghosts, were kept far from such important events, but one of the regular servers had fallen ill at the last moment, and Gloria had no choice but to pull Elena upstairs to fill the gap. "Keep your head down," Gloria had warned, pressing a black and white uniform into Elena's hands. "Walk softly. Don't look anyone in the eye. Don't speak unless spoken to. The men in that room could kill you simply because they don't like the way you breathe." Now Elena moved through the crowd like a shadow. A silver tray of champagne balanced perfectly in her aching hands. She wove between expensive suits and predatory smiles, invisible to everyone who mattered. At the head of the room, Dominic Castellano held court. He stood beside a massive marble fireplace, dressed in a black suit so perfectly tailored it seemed to absorb the light around him. His steel-gray eyes swept across the gathering like a hawk surveying its territory. When he spoke, even in casual conversation, men leaned in to listen. When he laughed a rare, cold sound, others laughed with him, desperate for his approval. This was power, Elena realized. Not just money or guns, but the ability to make powerful men desperate for a single moment of your attention. Then the room shifted. A new figure appeared at the entrance of the ballroom, and the crowd parted before him like water before a blade. Elena watched from the shadows as conversations faltered, as smiles became strained, as the very air seemed to grow colder. Viktor Volkov walked into the gathering like he owned it. He was 42 years old, tall and lean, with platinum blonde hair slicked back from a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty carved into every feature. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, like ice frozen so deep it had forgotten the sun. Russian Mafia. Elena had heard whispers about him, even in the basement, a man who had risen through the ranks of the Bratva with a brutality that made even hardened criminals uneasy. Viktor moved directly toward Dominic, ignoring the other guests as if they were furniture. The crowd held its breath. "Dominic," Viktor's accent was thick, his smile razor-thin. "It has been too long." Dominic's expression didn't change, but something hardened behind his eyes. "Viktor, I don't recall sending you an invitation." "Ah, but surely you wouldn't exclude your most important ally?" Viktor spread his hands in mock innocence. "I heard about your little gathering and thought I would pay my respects in person." "How considerate." Viktor stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow carried to every corner of the silent room. "You look tired, my friend. Worn. Rumor has it you've been firing doctors left and right. 5 in 3 months, yes?" His pale eyes glittered with barely concealed satisfaction. "Perhaps it's time to consider retirement. Let younger blood take the reins." The room seemed to stop breathing. Dominic's face remained impassive, but Elena saw his hand tighten almost imperceptibly around his glass of whiskey. "I'll retire when I'm dead, Viktor. Until then, I suggest you remember whose house you're standing in." Of course. Viktor raised his hands in mock surrender, still smiling. "I meant no offense, only concern for an old friend's health." He turned to leave, but paused beside Elena, so close she could smell his cologne, sharp and expensive, and somehow wrong. He plucked a glass of champagne from her tray without looking at her. But as he did, he leaned toward the man beside him and whispered words that Elena caught despite herself. "Tonight, the king falls, and I'll be here to pick up the crown." Elena's blood turned to ice. Viktor walked away without a backward glance, leaving a wake of uneasy silence behind him. Across the room, Dominic stood perfectly still, his face carved from stone, but Elena saw what no one else did. She saw the slight tremor in his hand as he set down his glass. She saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes lost focus for just a moment. She saw him press his fingertips against his temple in a gesture so quick most would have missed it. The darkness in his head, Lucas had said, growing bigger every day. Victor walked away with a triumphant smile, and Elena, standing in the shadows with her tray of champagne, suddenly felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. Something terrible was about to happen. Victor had barely disappeared through the ballroom doors when the pain struck. Dominic felt it building in the moments after the confrontation, a pressure behind his eyes, a tightness in his skull that he recognized all too well. He had learned to hide these episodes, to mask the agony behind an expressionless face, to excuse himself before anyone noticed. But this time was different. This time, the pain didn't build gradually. It detonated. One moment, Dominic was standing by the fireplace, nodding at something one of the Chicago aldermen was saying. The next, his vision fractured into shards of white and black, and a sound like 1,000 freight trains roared through his skull. He tried to step back, tried to excuse himself, tried to do anything that might preserve the image of invincibility he had spent 23 years constructing. His legs refused to obey. The crystal glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor, sending champagne and broken glass exploding across the polished stone. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the sound, and then Dominic Castellano, the ghost of Chicago, the most feared man in the American underworld, collapsed. His body hit the marble with a sickening thud. His limbs began to jerk and twist in violent, uncontrolled spasms. White foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth. His eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, blank and terrifying. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed and stumbled backward, champagne glasses crashing to the floor. Some of the crime bosses drew weapons, thinking it was an attack, spinning in circles looking for threats that didn't exist. Others simply stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. Tony Marchetti was the first to reach his boss. He dropped to his knees beside Dominic, his face drained of all color, his usual composure completely shattered. Boss, can you hear me? He grabbed Dominic's shoulders, trying to hold him still, as the convulsions continued. Someone call a doctor. Now. The crowd parted as an elderly man pushed through Salvatore Castellano, 64 years old, silver-haired and frail, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume on a broken man. He had been in the study when the commotion began, and he had run faster than his aging body should have allowed. My son, Salvatore fell to his knees beside Dominic, his wrinkled hands trembling as they reached for his son's face. Dominic! No, doctor. Nathan Cross arrived moments later, medical bag in hand. He had been attending the party as a guest, a precaution Dominic had insisted upon despite having fired him just weeks before. Now he knelt beside his dying patient, his hands moving with clinical precision even as his face went pale. He checked Dominic's pulse, shined a light into his rolled-back eyes, pressed his fingers against the side of Dominic's neck, feeling for something Elena couldn't see. When he looked up, his expression was grave. Brain hemorrhage, Dr. Cross announced, his voice cutting through the panicked murmurs of the crowd. The tumor has ruptured. Blood is flooding the brain. Do something, Tony shouted. Fix him. I can't. Not here. Dr. Cross shook his head, desperation creeping into his professional tone. He needs emergency surgery immediately. A full neurosurgical team, specialized equipment. Then get him to a hospital. I've already called for a medical helicopter, but it's 25 minutes away at minimum. The doctor's voice cracked. He doesn't have 25 minutes. Without a miracle, Dominic Castellano will be dead within 10 minutes, maybe less. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The convulsions had stopped now, but that wasn't a good sign. Dominic lay motionless on the cold marble, his chest barely rising, his lips beginning to turn blue. The mighty king of Chicago, reduced to a dying man on the floor of his own castle. Elena stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, her tray of champagne forgotten in her hands. She watched the scene unfold with a strange mixture of emotions she couldn't name. This was the man who had murdered her husband, the man who had made her a slave, the man who had stolen 10 months of her life and countless years from her children. She should feel joy. She should feel triumph. So why did she feel nothing but dread? Her eyes scanned the room and found Viktor Volkov standing in the far corner, apart from the panic, apart from the chaos. His arms were crossed over his chest, and on his face was a smile of pure, undisguised satisfaction. He wasn't surprised, Elena realized. He had known this was coming. Perhaps he had even planned for it. Tonight, the king falls. The words echoed in her mind as she watched Salvatore Castellano gather his dying son into his arms, rocking him like a child, tears streaming down his aged face. "My son," the old man sobbed, his voice breaking into pieces. "No, don't leave me. Not you too. Please, God, not my son." But God, it seemed, was not listening. Dominic's breathing grew shallower. His skin turned gray. The great and terrible ill Fantasma was fading away, one labored breath at a time. Salvatore fell to his knees beside his son, tears streaming down his aged face. "My son, no, don't leave me." But Dominic lay motionless, his breathing growing weaker, his lips turning blue. The most powerful mafia boss in Chicago was dying, and no one could do anything. 3 floors below the chaos, Marco and Lucas woke at the same moment. It was not the distant screams that roused them, nor the muffled thunder of footsteps above. It was something deeper, a tremor in the fabric of the world that only they could feel. Lucas sat up first, his green eyes wide in the darkness, his small hand pressed against his chest as if trying to contain something too large for his body. "Marco," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Do you feel that?" Marco was already awake, already sitting, already staring at the ceiling with an expression far too old for his 5 years. The darkness. It exploded. "He's dying." Lucas's face was pale, tears beginning to gather at the corners of his eyes. "The big master is dying right now. I can feel it, all the black stuff spreading through his head. It's everywhere. It's eating everything." "How long?" Marco asked, though he already knew the answer. "Minutes, maybe less." Lucas began to cry softly, overwhelmed by the sensation of death creeping toward someone 3 floors above. It hurts so much. He's in so much pain. The door burst open. Elena rushed in, still wearing her server's uniform, her face flushed with panic. She had run from the ballroom the moment she realized what was happening, not to help Dominic, but to protect her children. If the mansion descended into chaos, if Victor or someone else decided to seize control, her sons would be the first casualties. She dropped to her knees and pulled both boys into her arms, holding them so tightly they could barely breathe. "Stay here," she gasped. "Both of you. Don't go outside. Don't make a sound. Do you understand?" Mama Lucas began. "No. Whatever is happening up there, it's not our business. We stay hidden. We stay safe." Marco pulled back from his mother's embrace, his green eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made Elena's heart stop. "Mom, we can save him." The words hung in the air like a physical thing. Elena's grip on her sons tightened until her knuckles went white. "No. But Mom, no." Her voice cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He killed your father. He made us slaves. He took everything from us. If he dies, it's exactly what he deserves." Lucas placed his small hand on his mother's arm. "Mom, I can feel him. He's scared. He doesn't want to die alone." "Good." Elena's voice was savage, barely recognizable. "Let him die scared and alone. Let him feel what we felt when he shot your father in front of us." Silence fell over the tiny room. Then Marco spoke, his voice quiet but steady, so steady that Elena felt something shift in her chest. "Mom, if he dies, who will spare us?" Elena froze. "The bad man with white hair, Victor, he wants to take over. I heard the servants talking about him." Marco's eyes were ancient, carrying a wisdom that no child should possess. "If he becomes the boss, what happens to us? At least this master lets us live. The next one might really sell us." Elena opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. Lucas squeezed her hand. "And Mom, I don't want to watch someone die when I can save them, no matter who they are, no matter what they did." "Lucas, you taught us that." Tears rolled down Lucas's cheeks, but his voice remained firm. "You taught us that everyone deserves kindness, even people who hurt us. You said that's what makes us human, that we can choose to be good even when others are bad." Elena stared at her sons, 5 years old, barely more than babies, and yet they were speaking truths that most adults never grasped. She thought of the years she had spent teaching them about compassion, about forgiveness, about choosing light even in darkness. She had taught them those lessons in the orphanage of their old apartment, whispering them like prayers against the violence of their father, against the cruelty of the world. And now, in the bowels of their enemy's fortress, her children were asking her to live by the very principles she had given them. "Are you sure?" Elena's voice was barely audible. "If you do this, everyone will know about your gift. Everyone will know what you can do. There's no going back." Marco reached out and took Lucas's hand. The twins looked at each other, and in that silent exchange, a decision was made. "Yes, Mom," they said together. "We're sure." Elena looked at her sons, the angels she had raised in the depths of hell. and she realized that she had no right to stop them. They were doing exactly what she had taught them to do. Love without conditions. Elena held her son's hands as they climbed the basement stairs, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shatter. The grand ballroom was in complete disarray when they arrived. Guests had pressed themselves against the walls, their faces pale with shock. Broken glass glittered on the marble floor, and in the center of it all, Dominic Castellano lay dying in his father's arms. Elena pushed through the crowd, pulling Marco and Lucas behind her. Whispers erupted in their wake, confused, suspicious, hostile. Who is that? The servant woman, the one who owes the debt. What are those children doing here? Tony Marchetti stepped into their path, his hand already drawing the gun from his holster. His face was a mask of grief and rage, and his eyes held the desperate look of a man watching his world collapse. Stop! His voice was hoarse, barely controlled. No one gets near the boss. Elena didn't stop. She kept walking until the barrel of the gun was inches from her chest. Shoot me if you want, she said, her voice steady despite her terror. Shoot me right here in front of everyone. But before you do, ask yourself one question. Your boss is dying. The doctor says he has minutes left. What other choice do you have? Tony's hand trembled. The gun wavered. She's insane, someone muttered from the crowd. What can a servant and 2 children possibly do? Let them through. The voice was weak, broken, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Salvatore Castellano looked up from his son's motionless body, his aged face streaked with tears. Let them try, he said. My son is dying. The doctors have given up. The helicopter won't arrive in time. His voice cracked. What do I have to lose? Tony hesitated for one more heartbeat. Then he stepped aside. Elena led her sons to where Dominic lay. Up close, he looked even worse than she had imagined, his skin gray, his lips blue, his chest barely moving. The most powerful man in Chicago, reduced to a shell waiting to be empty. Marco and Lucas knelt beside him without hesitation. Marco positioned himself at Dominic's head, placing his small hands gently on the dying man's temples. Lucas knelt at his chest, laying his palms flat over Dominic's heart. What are they doing? Someone asked. This is ridiculous. Quiet! Salvatore's voice cut through the murmurs. Everyone be silent! The twins closed their eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd shifted restlessly. Tony's hand twitched toward his gun again. Then the light came. It began as a faint glow beneath the boys' palms, soft and golden, like the first rays of dawn breaking through storm clouds. The light spread slowly, flowing from their hands into Dominic's body, tracing the lines of his veins, illuminating him from within. The ballroom fell utterly silent. The light grew stronger, warmer, filling the space around them with a radiance that seemed to push back the shadows themselves. It wasn't harsh or blinding, it was gentle, comforting, like sunlight on a spring morning when the world feels full of possibility. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. Marco's face grew pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead and ran down his cheeks. Lucas began to tremble, his small body shaking with the effort of channeling something far greater than himself. They're hurting themselves, Elena whispered, her maternal instinct screaming at her to pull them away. But she stayed still. Her hands clenched so tightly her nails drew blood from her palms. 4 minutes. The boys grew paler still, their breathing labored, their bodies swaying. 5 minutes. And then Dominic Castellano drew a breath. Not the shallow, dying gasps of before this was a deep, full breath that filled his lungs completely. His eyes flew open, steel gray and clear, staring up at the ceiling as if seeing it for the first time. The light faded slowly, retreating back into the twins' hands until it vanished completely. Dr. Cross rushed forward, pushing through the stunned crowd. He dropped to his knees beside Dominic, his hands moving frantically, checking pulse, shining light into pupils, pressing fingers against the carotid artery. His face went white. Impossible, he breathed. This is impossible. What is it? Salvatore demanded. Tell me. Pulse is stable, strong. Pupils are reactive and normal. Blood pressure is evening out. The doctor looked up, his eyes wide with something approaching religious terror. The hemorrhage. It stopped. The damage. It's healed. As if it never happened. As if he couldn't finish the sentence. There were no medical words for what he had just witnessed. Marco and Lucas collapsed at the same moment, their small bodies crumpling onto the cold marble floor. The effort had drained everything from them, every ounce of strength, every reserve of energy. Elena lunged forward, gathering both sons into her arms. They were conscious, but barely, their green eyes unfocused, their limbs limp as rag dolls. My angels, she sobbed, pressing kisses to their foreheads, their cheeks, their hair. My brave, beautiful angels. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud. Dominic sat up slowly, his steel-gray eyes scanning the room. And when his gaze landed on the two small boys lying exhausted in their mother's arms, something inside his chest shattered. The children he had condemned were the very ones who had given him a second chance. 5 days after the miracle, Elena received a summons she had been dreading. A servant came to the basement room, a real servant, not a debt slave like herself, and told her that Mr. Castellano wanted to see her in his study. Immediately, alone, Elena's stomach twisted into knots as she climbed the stairs. She had spent the past 5 days caring for Marco and Lucas, who had needed nearly 48 hours of sleep to recover from their ordeal. The boys were fine now, weak, but fine, and the mansion had been buzzing with whispers about what had happened. Whispers about a miracle, about 2 children with impossible abilities, about the night the ghost of Chicago should have died but didn't. Now the moment of reckoning had arrived. The study door was open when she reached it. Dominic stood by the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. He looked different than he had before, not just healthier, but somehow less sharp. The razor edges that had defined him seemed slightly blunted. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Elena obeyed, then stood just inside the threshold, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "The MRI results came back this morning." Dominic's voice was quiet, almost contemplative. "The tumor is gone. Completely. Not shrunk, not dormant, gone. As if it never existed." He turned to face her, his steel-gray eyes unreadable. "The doctors have no explanation. They're calling it a spontaneous remission, but we both know that's not what happened." Elena said nothing. Dominic walked to his desk and picked up a folder. $3 million. That was your husband's debt. At the rate you've been working, it would have taken approximately 53 years to repay. He set the folder down. "The debt is forgiven. All of it. You and your sons are free to leave whenever you wish." The words hung in the air between them. Elena had dreamed of this moment for 10 months. She had fantasized about walking out those iron gates with her sons, about breathing free air, about never seeing this mansion or this man again. But instead of relief, she felt something else entirely. Rage. "You think that's enough?" The words tore out of her before she could stop them, raw and jagged. "You think one sentence erases everything?" Dominic's expression flickered but didn't change. 10 months. Elena's voice rose, shaking with fury she had suppressed for nearly a year. 10 months of hell. 20 hours of work every day until my body broke. My sons living in a windowless storage room, breathing mold, never seeing sunlight. She stepped closer, her fists clenched at her sides. "You shot my husband, in front of me, in front of our children. His blood splattered on my face, and you made me wipe it off the floor myself while my babies watched." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her voice only grew stronger. "You taught me a lesson about consequences, remember? Well, here's your lesson. Some things can never be undone. Some debts can never be repaid." She was standing right in front of him now, close enough to see the slight widening of his eyes. "I don't need your pity. I don't need your money. And I certainly don't need your apology, because there isn't an apology in the world big enough to make up for what you've done." Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Dominic stood perfectly still, absorbing every word, every accusation, every ounce of her hatred. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He didn't try to justify. "You're right," he said finally, his voice low. "About all of it. Everything you said is true." Elena blinked, caught off guard. "You have every right to hate me, every right to want me dead. I'm not asking for forgiveness." His jaw tightened. "I know I don't deserve it. I know nothing I do will ever undo what I've done." He paused, and something shifted in his gray eyes, something almost human. "But your sons, they deserve better than a basement room, better than hiding like ghosts. Stay here until you find somewhere safe, a real home, money to start over. I owe them that much. I owe you that much." Before Elena could respond, the study door burst open. Lucas ran in, his curly hair bouncing, his green eyes bright with a joy that seemed impossible in this dark place. He ran straight past his mother and threw his small arms around Dominic's leg, hugging him with the unrestrained affection that only children possess. "You're better," Lucas exclaimed, looking up at the stunned Mafia boss with a radiant smile. "I'm so glad you're better. I didn't like seeing you hurt. It made me sad." Dominic stood frozen. 23 years. For 23 years, no one had touched him with affection. No one had hugged him. No one had looked at him with anything but fear or calculation. And now this child, the son of the man he had murdered, was embracing him as if he were someone worth loving. Elena watched her son embrace the man who had destroyed their family, and she didn't know whether to pull him away or cry, because in Lucas's pure eyes, there was no hatred, only compassion. The same compassion she had tried to teach him. 300 miles away, in a mansion overlooking the Hudson River, Victor Volkov was not taking his defeat gracefully. The New York estate was everything the Castellano mansion was not: cold, modern, all glass and steel and sharp angles that reflected Victor's personality perfectly. He sat at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by his most trusted lieutenants, his pale blue eyes burning with barely contained fury. He should be dead. Victor's accent thickened when he was angry, his words clipped and harsh. I watched him collapse. I watched the doctor give up. Everything was perfect. Dmitry Petrov, Victor's second in command, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The rumors are spreading everywhere, boss. They're saying it was a miracle, that 2 children healed him with their hands. I know what they're saying. Victor slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses of vodka jump. I was there. I saw the light. I saw Dominic Castellano come back from the dead because of 2 little brats. He stood abruptly and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the gray cityscape below. Those children ruined everything I had planned. Years of waiting, years of positioning, years of watching Dominic slowly die, all destroyed in 5 minutes by 2 5-year-olds. What do you want us to do? Dmitry asked carefully. Victor turned. His expression had shifted from fury to something far more dangerous: calculation. Those children are more valuable than anything I've ever encountered. Think about it, Dmitry. He began to pace, his mind racing. How many billionaires are dying of cancer right now? How many presidents and kings and oil sheiks are rotting away from diseases their money can't cure? They would pay anything for the chance to be healed. Understanding dawned on Dmitry's face. You want to take the children and their mother. She's the key to controlling them. Victor smiled, a cold, reptilian expression that didn't reach his eyes. We grab all 3, bring them here, and we have the most valuable commodity on Earth. A healing service for the ultra-wealthy. 50 million per session. 100 million, whatever we want to charge. And if the children refuse to cooperate? Victor's smile widened. That's what the mother is for. Amazing how cooperative children become when their mother is in pain. He returned to the table and spread out a blueprint of the Castellano mansion stolen months ago by one of his spies. We hid in 4 days, 30 of our best men. We cut the power, disable the cameras, and infiltrate from 4 directions simultaneously. He tapped a spot on the map. They're keeping the woman and children on the 3rd floor now. We secure them and extract before Dominic's men can mount a defense. What about Dominic himself? Kill him if you can. But the priority is the cargo. Victor leaned back, satisfaction spreading across his features. By this time next week, I'll control the most powerful weapon in the world, and Dominic Castellano will finally understand that he's not the only predator in this game. His lieutenants nodded, already beginning to plan logistics, to assign teams, to prepare for the assault. None of them noticed the quiet man in the corner, a lower-level soldier who had joined Victor's organization 8 months ago. A man who listened carefully, remembered everything, and reported directly to Tony Marchetti. Within 24 hours, every detail of Victor's plan was sitting on Dominic Castellano's desk. Victor smiled as he finalized his plan. He didn't know that his every word was being recorded, and he didn't know that Dominic Castellano was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Tony Marchetti delivered the intelligence report at midnight, his face grim as he laid out Victor's entire plan on Dominic's desk. 4 days from now, 30 men. They're coming for Elena and the boys. Tony's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his concern. Victor wants to use the children's abilities to sell healing services to wealthy clients. The mother is leveraged to ensure cooperation. Dominic sat behind his desk, reading the detailed report in silence. His face was expressionless, the same cold mask he had worn for 23 years. Then something changed. His hand came down on the oak desk with such force that the wood cracked. The sound was like a gunshot, making Tony flinch backward. Victor dares to touch them? Tony had served Dominic Castellano for 15 years. He had seen his boss order executions without blinking. He had watched him face down rival families, federal investigations, assassination attempts, all with the same icy composure that had earned him the name Il Fantasma. He had never seen this. Dominic was on his feet, his steel-gray eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to burn from somewhere deep inside. His fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. The scar on his face stood out livid against skin flushed with rage. He thinks he can waltz into my home and take them? Dominic's voice was a snarl, barely recognizable. He thinks he can use those children like tools, hurt their mother to control them. Boss, triple the security. Every entrance, every window, every possible breach point. I want men on every floor, armed and ready. Dominic began pacing like a caged predator. Set traps throughout the grounds. Prepare the underground bunker for Elena and the boys. And contact every ally we have. I want reinforcements here within 48 hours. Tony nodded, already making mental notes. And if Victor's men break through our defenses? Dominic stopped pacing. He there to face Tony. And his expression was absolute. If anyone breaks through, they step over my body first. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning that Tony couldn't quite process. Boss, Tony hesitated, choosing his words carefully. You've changed. Since that night. Since those kids healed you, you're different. I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you like this. Why? Dominic was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its fury, replaced by something raw, something almost vulnerable. Those children saved my life. Their father was killed by me. Their mother was my slave for 10 months. I made them suffer in ways that can never be undone. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had pulled the trigger, that had signed the orders, that had built an empire on blood and fear. They had every reason to let me die, every reason to watch me suffer and feel nothing but satisfaction. He raised his eyes to meet Tony's. But they didn't. 2 5-year-old boys knelt beside me and gave me something I never deserved, something no one has given me in 23 years. His voice cracked almost imperceptibly. Compassion, pure, unconditional compassion. Tony said nothing. For the first time since I was 13 years old, someone saw me as something other than a monster. They saw a person worth saving. Dominic's jaw tightened. I will protect them. I will protect all 3 of them, even if it costs my life. Outside the study door, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, Elena stood frozen. She had come to ask about moving Marco and Lucas to a room with better ventilation. She had raised her hand to knock when she heard Tony's voice through the slightly open door, and she had stayed, listening to every word. Now she pressed her back against the cold wall, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. She remembered Gloria's story about the 13-year-old boy who opened a wooden crate. She remembered the raw grief in Salvatore's voice as he held his dying son. She remembered the look in Dominic's eyes when Lucas hugged his leg, shock, confusion, and something that might have been longing. That night, Elena lay awake in her new room on the 3rd floor, staring at the ceiling while her son slept peacefully beside her. She thought about hatred, and how heavy it had become to carry. She thought about forgiveness, and how impossible it still seemed. Elena didn't forgive him. Maybe she never would, but that night, she stopped seeing only a monster. She began to see the broken child inside the 13-year-old boy, who lost everything and never learned how to heal. Until now. Victor struck one day early. At 2 a.m, while the Castellano mansion slept, 35 armed men breached the perimeter from 4 directions simultaneously. They moved like shadows, cutting power lines and disabling cameras with military precision. The lights went out first, then the gunfire started. Elena jolted awake to the sound of explosions and screaming. For one disorienting moment, she thought she was back in her old apartment, back on the night Dominic had come to kill her husband. But then Marco and Lucas were clutching at her arms, their small bodies trembling, and reality crashed back with brutal force. Mama, what's happening? Lucas whimpered. Bad men are here, Marco said, his voice eerily calm despite his fear. I can feel them. Lots of them. They want to take us. Elena didn't waste time on questions. She grabbed her sons and pulled them to the corner of the room farthest from the door. Then she ran to the heavy wooden dresser and pushed it with all her strength, blocking the entrance. Stay down, she ordered, crouching over them like a human shield. Whatever happens, you have to survive. Do you understand me? No matter what, you survive. Mama, promise me. We promise, the twins whispered together. The gunfire grew closer. Elena could hear shouting in Russian, boots pounding up the stairs, bodies falling. The Castellano guards were fighting back, but there were so many attackers, and the darkness gave the invaders an advantage. Then the door exploded inward. The dresser flew across the room, splintering against the wall. 3 men in black tactical gear stormed through, their weapons sweeping the darkness with mounted flashlights. One of the beams landed on Elena, crouched in the corner with her arms wrapped around her sons. Found the targets, the lead man said into his radio, a thick Russian accent coloring his words. 3rd floor, east wing, 3 of them, healthy, moving to extract. He stepped toward Elena, reaching for her arm. Then Dominic Castellano came through the doorway like a storm given human form. He moved faster than Elena's eyes could track, firing twice before the invaders could even turn around. 2 men dropped instantly, dead before they hit the ground. But the third was faster. He lunged toward Elena and grabbed her, spinning her around and pressing his gun to her temple. "Back off, Castellano." The man's voice was high with panic, his arm locked around Elena's throat. "Back off, or she dies." Dominic froze, his gun still raised, his chest heaving. Blood seeped from a wound on his left arm. He had been fighting his way through the mansion, and the battle had cost him. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly calm despite the chaos. "This is between you and me. The woman and children have nothing to do with it. They have everything to do with it." The man laughed, a desperate sound. "Do you know how much Victor will pay for these kids? They're worth more than your entire empire. Victor is finished. Let her go, and I'll let you live. You'll let me." His left shoulder hurts. The small voice cut through the tension like a blade. Everyone turned to look at Lucas, who stood behind his mother, his green eyes fixed on the gunman with an intensity that seemed impossible for a 5-year-old. "Old wound," Lucas continued, his voice trembling but clear. "It never healed right. If he raises his arm, he can't aim straight. His muscles won't work." The gunman's face went white. "How did you?" Dominic understood instantly. He threw his gun to the floor and raised both hands, stepping backward as if surrendering. "Fine," he said loudly. "You win. I'm backing off." The gunman relaxed slightly, his grip on Elena loosening as he reached for his radio to call for backup. That was all Elena needed. She drove her elbow backward into his left shoulder with every ounce of strength she possessed. The man screamed, his arm spasming, his gun hand jerking wildly to the side. The shot meant for Dominic went wide, shattering a window. Dominic was already moving. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, his fist connecting with the gunman's jaw with a crack that echoed off the walls. The man crumpled, unconscious before he hit the floor. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Elena felt arms around her, strong arms, trembling arms pulling her and her sons close. Dominic knelt on the floor, gathering all 3 of them against his chest, his breath ragged, his body shaking. "Are you okay?" His voice was hoarse, cracking with emotion. "Marco? Lucas? Elena? Elena, not Miguel's wife, not the servant, not the woman, just Elena." She looked up at him, at the blood on his face, at the terror in his steel-gray eyes, terror not for himself, but for them. And she realized something that shook her to her core. He would have died for them. Without hesitation, without regret, he would have given his life to keep them safe. Dominic pulled all 3 of them into his arms. He was shaking not from fear, but from the terror of almost losing them. "Are you okay? Marco? Lucas? Elena?" It was the first time he called her name. Not Miguel's wife, not the servant, just Elena. The battle ended as dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and gold. Victor's assault had failed catastrophically. Of the 35 men he had sent, 20 lay dead across the Castellano grounds in the gardens, in the hallways. On the stairs they had never finished climbing. 15 more had been captured, disarmed, and forced to their knees in the grand ballroom, where, just weeks ago, their boss had watched Dominic collapse and smiled. Now Victor Volkov himself knelt among them. Tony had caught him trying to escape through the service entrance, his platinum hair disheveled, his expensive suit torn, his pale blue eyes wild with desperation. The arrogant predator who had crashed the Castellano party with such confidence was now just another prisoner awaiting judgment. Dominic walked into the ballroom slowly, his left arm bandaged where a bullet had grazed him, his face streaked with dried blood that wasn't all his own. Behind him came Elena, Marco, and Lucas, clutching her hands, and Gloria, who had spent the night hiding with them in the underground bunker. The captured men looked up at Dominic's approach, and even hardened killers flinched at what they saw in his eyes. Victor tried to maintain his composure, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "Dominic, we can make a deal. Whatever you want, territory, money, connections in Moscow." Dominic stopped directly in front of him and drew his gun. The ballroom fell silent. Everyone knew what came next. This was how the underworld worked. This was how Dominic Castellano had built his empire through blood, through fear, through the absolute certainty that crossing him meant death. Victor closed his eyes, waiting for the bullet. It never came. Instead, Dominic holstered his weapon and pulled out his phone. "This is Dominic Castellano," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I need to speak with Agent Morrison at the FBI's Organized Crime Division." Tell him I have a gift for him." Victor's eyes flew open. "What are you, Victor Volkov?" Dominic spoke into the phone, his gaze never leaving his enemy's face. "Russian Mafia. I'm handing him over along with evidence of human trafficking, money laundering, weapons dealing, and attempted kidnapping." "Yes, I'll hold." "You can't do this." Victor lunged forward, but Tony's boot on his back forced him back down. "This isn't how we operate. This breaks every rule. Your rules." Dominic's voice was ice. "Not mine. Not anymore." He turned to Tony, who was staring at him with an expression of pure shock. "Boss." Tony's voice was barely a whisper. "You're not killing him?" "No. But this is Victor Volkov. He tried to kidnap the children. Sold. He would have sold them like cattle. He deserves to rot in a federal prison for the rest of his life." Dominic looked at his old friend, and something in his steel-gray eyes had shifted. "I've killed enough people, Tony. Men who deserved it, men who didn't. I've lost count. And what did it get me? An empire built on corpses, a legacy written in blood, a soul so dark I forgot what light looked like." He turned to face the room, his men, his enemies, the prisoners awaiting their fate. "It's time to stop." The words hung in the air like a benediction. "The Castellano organization is changing," Dominic announced, his voice rising to fill every corner of the ballroom. "Over the next 3 years, we will transition completely to legitimate business. Real estate, restaurants, hotels, things we can build without destroying others." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Anyone who wants to walk this new path with me, you're welcome to stay. Anyone who can't accept this change, you're free to leave. I'll provide enough money for you to start over somewhere else. No grudges, no revenge. But you choose today." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Tony Marchetti stepped forward and stood at Dominic's right hand, exactly where he had stood for 15 years. "I'm staying." Gloria Santini moved to stand beside him. "So am I." One by one, others followed. Some left 5 men who couldn't imagine a life without violence, who walked out with their severance and never looked back. But 35 remained, forming a semicircle behind their boss, choosing a future none of them had ever imagined possible. Elena watched from the doorway, her sons pressed against her sides, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not ever completely, but something close to it, something that might, in time, grow into something more. That night, the ghost of Chicago made his final choice. Not revenge, not violence, but redemption. And for the first time in 23 years, Dominic Castellano felt something he thought he had lost forever: hope. 6 months passed like a dream Elena was afraid to believe. The Castellano mansion had transformed from a fortress of fear into something that almost resembled a home. The heavy curtains that had always been drawn were now pulled back, letting sunlight flood through the tall windows. The oppressive silence was replaced by laughter, the sound of children running through hallways that had once echoed only with footsteps and whispered orders. Marco and Lucas attended the finest private school in Chicago now. Every morning, a driver took them to a campus with green lawns and kind teachers, where they learned to read and write and play with other children their age. They had friends, real friends, who came over for playdates, who invited them to birthday parties, who didn't know or care that they lived in a mansion with a complicated history. "Mom, I got a gold star on my spelling test," Marco would announce, bursting through the door each afternoon with Lucas right behind him. "I made a painting of our family," Lucas would add, holding up a colorful mess of fingerprints and joy. Elena would examine each achievement with the gravity it deserved, her heart swelling with a happiness she had never dared to hope for. But the greatest surprise was Dominic. Every evening, without fail, he would appear in the sitting room where Elena helped the boys with their homework. He would sit beside them, the fearsome ghost of Chicago, and read stories about dragons and princes and faraway lands. His deep voice would soften as he spoke, and the twins would lean against him, completely unafraid of the man who had once been their boogeyman. He taught them to ride bicycles in the garden, running beside them with his hands outstretched, ready to catch them if they fell. He taught them to play chess, letting them win sometimes and challenging them other times. He became, gradually and almost invisibly, a father. Not a replacement for Miguel. No one spoke of Miguel, but something new, something of his own. 3 months ago, Dominic had announced the establishment of the Vasquez Castellano Foundation. Elena had been stunned when she saw the name, her family name, placed before his own. "It's your clinic," Dominic had explained simply. "Free healthcare for people who can't afford it. I'm just providing the money. The vision is yours." "Why Vasquez first?" Elena had asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you deserve to be first. Because your sons taught me what compassion means. Because he had stopped, as if afraid of saying too much. Because it's right. Now, on a warm spring evening, Elena sat in the garden beneath a canopy of stars. The air smelled of roses and night-blooming jasmine, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. She heard footsteps on the stone path and didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Dominic sat beside her on the wrought iron bench, leaving a careful distance between them. For a while, neither spoke. They simply existed together in the darkness. Two people who had traveled impossible roads to arrive at this moment. "I know you can't completely forgive me," Dominic said finally, his voice quiet. "I'm not asking for that. What I did, there's no erasing it, no making it right. I killed your husband. I made you a slave. I know what you did." Elena's voice was calm, steadier than she had expected. "I remember every moment of it. I will probably remember for the rest of my life." Dominic nodded slowly, accepting the truth of her words. "I hated you for so long," Elena continued. "When you were dying on that ballroom floor, part of me was glad. Part of me wanted to watch you suffer the way I had suffered. You had every right to." "Yes, I did." She turned to look at him, at the scar on his face, at the gray eyes that had softened over these months, at the man who was trying so hard to become someone new. "But my sons taught me something that night, something I had been teaching them without really understanding it myself." "What's that?" "That forgiveness isn't forgetting. It isn't pretending the past didn't happen. It isn't excusing what was done." She took a breath, feeling the words take shape. "Forgiveness is allowing yourself to move forward. It's choosing not to let hatred poison the rest of your life. It's accepting that people can change, even when everything says they can't." Dominic was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Can you forgive me?" Elena considered the question, really considered it, with all its weight and complexity. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Maybe someday, maybe not completely." She reached out slowly, hesitantly, and laid her hand over his. "But I'm willing to try." Dominic looked down at their joined hands as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. When he raised his eyes to hers, they were bright with something she had never seen in them before. He leaned toward her slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative. Two people who had never expected to find each other, who had every reason to remain enemies, choosing instead to reach for something more. It wasn't passionate or desperate. It was soft and careful and full of unspoken promises. From a window on the third floor, two small faces pressed against the glass, watching with barely contained delight. "See?" Lucas whispered, his green eyes shining. "Mom likes Daddy Dominic." "I told you," Marco whispered back, grinning. "I knew it would happen. Should we go down and hug them?" "No." Marco pulled his brother back from the window. "Let them have their moment. We can hug them tomorrow." In the garden below, Dominic held Elena close, feeling her warmth against his chest. For 23 years, he had frozen his heart, and now, two small boys and their brave mother had melted the ice, piece by piece. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was learning to be human again. 1 year later, the Castellano mansion had become something no one could have imagined a home. Sunlight streamed through every window, illuminating rooms that had once been shrouded in darkness. The heavy air of fear and secrets had lifted, replaced by something lighter, warmer, alive. And everywhere, there was laughter. In the grand sitting room, Salvatore Castellano sat across from his grandsons at the chess table, grandsons in spirit if not in blood. Though no one made such distinctions anymore. The old man's silver hair caught the afternoon light as he moved a knight across the board. "You're getting better," he said, watching Marco consider his next move with serious concentration. "Soon you'll be beating me." "I already beat you yesterday, Grandpa," Lucas piped up from beside his brother. "You just pretended I didn't." Salvatore laughed, a sound that had been absent from this house for over 2 decades. A wise man knows when to let the young ones win. It builds their confidence. "You didn't let me win. I won for real." "Of course you did, little one. Of course you did." In the kitchen, Gloria Santini hummed an old Italian melody while stirring a pot of sauce that filled the entire first floor with its aroma. She had cooked in this kitchen for 35 years, but never like this. Never for a family that actually felt like a family. "Dinner will be ready in 1 hour," she called out, her voice carrying through the open doors. Everyone washed their hands. Tony Marchetti stood by the garden entrance, exactly where he had stood for 15 years, as Dominic's right hand. But his posture had changed. His hand no longer rested near his weapon. His eyes no longer scanned for threats with that constant, exhausting vigilance. Instead, he watched the garden with something approaching peace. And in that garden, Dominic Castellano was running, not from enemies, not toward violence. He was running after two 6-year-old boys who shrieked with delight as they zigzagged between rose bushes and around the old oak tree. "You can't catch us, Daddy Dominic," Marco shouted over his shoulder. "We're too fast," Lucas added, his curly hair bouncing as he sprinted across the grass. Dominic lunged forward and scooped Lucas into his arms, spinning him around while the boy squealed with joy. Marco circled back, crashing into Dominic's legs, and all three of them tumbled onto the soft grass in a heap of laughter. "Caught you," Dominic said, breathless and grinning. "You cheated," Lucas protested through his giggles. "I'm a Castellano. We don't cheat. We strategize." Marco threw his small arms around Dominic's neck. "Daddy Dominic, carry me inside. I'm tired, Daddy Dominic." The words hit him like they did every time a wave of emotion so powerful it threatened to knock him down. He had heard many things in his 37 years. He had been called boss, Fantasma, monster, killer. He had been feared, hated, respected, and reviled, but he had never been called daddy. Dominic stood slowly, lifting Marco onto his shoulders and taking Lucas's hand in his own, and as he walked toward the mansion, toward the warmth and light and family waiting inside, something broke loose in his chest. He stopped. Tears rolled down his cheeks, hot and unexpected. The first tears he had shed in 23 years. Not tears of grief or pain. Tears of something he had forgotten existed. Happiness. Pure, overwhelming, terrifying happiness. "Daddy Dominic, why are you crying?" Lucas asked, looking up with concern. "Because I'm happy," Dominic answered, his voice cracking. "Because I never thought I would have this. Any of this." From the window on the second floor, Elena watched the scene unfold. She saw Dominic standing in the garden with her sons, their sons now, in every way that mattered. She saw the tears on his face, the smile that transformed his scarred features into something almost beautiful. She saw the man she had once hated more than anyone in the world, now loving her children with a devotion that took her breath away. The ring on her finger caught the light, a simple gold band that Dominic had given her 3 months ago, not with grand gestures or expensive ceremonies, but with quiet words spoken in this very garden. "I don't deserve you," he had said. "I don't deserve any of this. But if you'll let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you and the boys, I promise I will never stop trying." She had said yes. Not because she had forgotten the past, not because the wounds had fully healed, but because she had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other, every day, despite everything. Dominic looked up at the window, and their eyes met across the distance. He smiled the warm, genuine smile that had been buried for 23 years, the smile of the boy he had been before tragedy twisted him into something dark. Elena smiled back, pressing her hand against the glass. This was her family now, built from the ashes of tragedy, forged in the fire of forgiveness, held together by the unconditional love of 2 small boys who had refused to let hatred win. She had walked into this mansion as a slave. She had lost everything: her husband, her freedom, her hope. She had lived in darkness, convinced that light would never find her again. But light had found her, in the most unexpected place, from the most unexpected source. Sometimes, miracles don't come from magic or the supernatural. Miracles come from unconditional compassion, from small hands willing to heal the one who hurt them most. And sometimes, the one who seems beyond saving is the one who deserves to be saved the most. Elena looked at her family, the family she never thought she would have, and she understood the greatest lesson of all. No one is a monster forever. No one is a prisoner of the past. As long as someone is willing to see the real human inside, as long as someone dares to love without conditions, everything can change. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. We wish you and your family good health, happiness, and peace in every single day. May your heart always find the courage to forgive, and may you always be surrounded by people who see the best in you. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.